2, 1. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Delusions of Grandeur discussions. So, thank you, everyone, for coming back. Hopefully, we didn't scare you away too much. And tonight, but tonight we're going to be. Is this beginning our? No, this is. This is birthday. Birthday. Methuselah, welcome to the show. Methuselah has turned 29 years old, and he's a young and up-and-coming entrepreneur.
What?
Dane.
Say that again, Sonny. Speak up. I can't hear you.
Dane, you're in human form now, and you're 29. So
barely.
Fine, we'll knight you when you're of age.
There you go.
But in any case, tonight we are going to be discussing one of this young old man's choices here. And I believe I'll hand it over to Dane to bring us through. So what movie is it that we're discussing tonight?
So for Delusions of Grandeur, for our pre-show, we have the delightful 2003 epic war drama period piece called The Last Samurai, starring Tom Cruise and Ken Watanabe and a whole bunch of other underrated actors like Billy Connolly and Timothy Spall and probably other Japanese actors whose names I can't remember. But anyway, yes. And directed by the highly underrated Edward Zwick, who most people might know for having directed Glory, which was another period epic war drama, and also written by John Logan, who is one of my favorite recent screenwriters, who wrote Star Trek Nemesis, The Aviator, Hugo, whole bunch of other great stuff. I think he's an exceptional writer, and this is probably my favorite film that he's written. So this film takes place in 1876 initially, so it's the centennial of the United States. And just brief little summary here. We got our main character, Captain Nathan Algren, a very accomplished warrior from the Western Front of the United States. So having fought in Custer's army and having suppressed a lot of Native American rebellions and up to and including outright genocidal slaughter beyond even just raids. And obviously has a guilty conscience about that and has succumbed to drink. He gets an assignment from a former army buddy to go to Japan, which has only recently, at that time, opened up trade relations with the United States and with the rest of the world during the Meiji Restoration. And he is assigned to go over there to train what is then the modern Japanese army to suppress a rebellion from the now depowered, obsolete samurai class led by a samurai named Katsumoto, played by Ken Watanabe, who was based on a real samurai leader, wasn't named Katsumoto, but was based on a real leader with a real rebellion from the samurai class that really had no place in the Meiji Restoration of Japan, which had persisted under obviously feudal rule for thousands of years. And so that is where our story begins. And of course, many dramatic hijinks ensue, as we will get into. But would Jake like to start with his first impressions of this, I think, fabulous film?
Sure. And actually, I did not look at the screenwriter's credits. As a matter of fact, the other day I watched bits and pieces of Rango for the first time in a while, and I didn't realize it was the same author. A very different screenplay, but very good one. Oh, it is a great one. And I definitely should shout out Hiroyuki Sanada and Shun Sagata. They're definitely two of the better known Japanese parts of the cast. But at any rate, I had seen this one initially in theaters. I actually did see it during its initial run. I want to say that we went as a family. I think my brothers and my mom all went to see it. And I remembered liking it quite a bit. I thought I was impressed by it. It's a little slow moving at times, but it is, but it does do a really good job. Zwick does a really good job with setting place and with setting time and getting pretty good generally acting. He's also the guy behind Blood Diamond, which was another good, well acted movie. I went into this having read some reviews because this was during my critic phase where I read as many reviews as I could get my hands on. And I still remember one critic's comment because it amused me at the time. And I think it has colored my perception of the film, I'm afraid.
Okay.
But I don't think it's entirely accurate, but it still amuses me. And that was I can't even remember. It might have been James Bardinelli. I can't remember who. One person said that Tom Cruise seems to have confused the art of acting with the act of looking at something really, really hard. And I just thought that was a very amusing way of describing his acting style. I don't think it's entirely accurate, but he does get some pretty solid, hard stares.
He does. Although, well, it's funny that you mention that, because what I would have said, because I'm a big Tom Cruise fan,
Right.
But one thing I will say with Tom Cruise is that as much as I love him as an actor, and as much as I love his intensity and his commitment and everything, almost all of the time, on the rare occasions when he has done a period piece, which is not very often, but almost always on those rare occasions where he's done that, he has stuck out like a sore thumb, because he is such a 20th and 21st century actor that when he's in another era, he really doesn't fit at all, with the notable exception of this film, where I think he does an exceptional job of not only playing this character, but fitting into that era, which, again, those are two different things. But funny you brought that up.
I don't think he fit in quite as well. I mean, Ken Watanabe definitely is perfectly, even though I read an interesting comment from a Japanese historian, apparently said he loved everything about the film except for Watanabe's character, because he felt that the samurai were a much darker, not as, this character's almost saintly in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But Watanabe does a brilliant job. Spall does a brilliant job, and so does Connolly. And some of them just really. But I do think you have a good point. Like one of the movies that Tom Cruise most stands out like a sore thumb for me is Interview with the Vampire.
Me too.
And that could be. He may have been trying to play, even though it's more contemporary-ish, he's playing a character who's much older. So, yeah, maybe that's part of it. But
he's kind of an eccentric, too, on top of that.
But basically, my first impression is all wrapped up in that initial introduction. The fact that Watanabe did get an Oscar nod, which is extraordinarily rare for Japanese actors. It was my introduction to Watanabe, as it was for most Americans.
Yeah, it was for me.
I've seen the film, I think, twice since then. I think I saw it when I got it, which was a long time back. And then this was my first time in several years seeing it, and I was almost able to come to it fresh. I kind of remembered it, but not, But it held up, and I think it might be one that would get a little better with repeat viewing. It's hard to say, but it definitely holds up pretty well.
Oh yeah. Well, and I'll get into my reasons, but I chose it above other epics just because thematically and stylistically, but especially thematically, it hits a lot of very personal chords with me. Plus, when I saw it, also. But just very quickly before we get to Brandon, but what you're saying with Ken Watanabe and the characterization of the samurai, that is one of the criticisms that I've heard against the film from, well, mostly in the Japanese press, but basically saying that it was somewhat of a romanticized depiction of the samurai who, by that time, well, certainly towards the kind of twilight of their years, were more corrupt, kind of in the same way as like European knights, were a privileged class and they had plenty of corruption as well.
Right.
But I mean, I guess partially that's inevitable, but also partially it is about not just the end of the samurai class, but also about the end of an era overall in Japanese history, let alone world history.
Right.
So I would say it's kind of excusable on that front because it fits the theme of the movie, and plus that era was indeed ending for Japan and for the rest of the world. But let's go to Brandon and see what he thought about this film.
Yeah, I was about to say, basically, one could say that depicting an honorable samurai as mostly all these honorable beings, very strict but very good, is pretty much the same as depicting knights as these chivalrous do-gooders. I mean, they're similar things. They're both basically the same concept, just with a different spin. They both serve a lord. They both have their own set of rules. They both tend to only follow the rules when it matters.
Even knights have the whole thing of dying with honor, and the
very
whole
similar.
A knight's death is basically if a sword is like stuck in the back. But and maybe the samurais is you kill yourself and you get your head lopped off.
But the point being that it is a similar system and all that, and again, you could make the argument that like if we were to do this in proper feudal Japan, that you would see many warlords, and then you'd have a daimyo, and you'd have different degrees of assholery amongst the samurai and different degrees of nobility with other groups and stuff. This is sort of one specific group of people that we follow. But yes, keep going.
So my opinion, and I'll probably be one of the closest to having a dissenting opinion about this film, even though it's not really. It's when I saw this, I have never seen this film up until recently, and there's a reason for it. It never really appealed to me. I saw this film coming out.
You're shocking me so bad.
I saw this film and I thought to myself, "Oh, look, another white savior movie."
You were thinking that all the way back in 03?
When I bothered to care about it, which was more closer to 07 and 08, because really and truly, I kind of just forgot about it. It just kind of got lost as, I'll catch it if I can. And it does, watching it finally does intrigue me a little bit. I enjoyed a lot of the cultural stuff going on. I know a bit about the period because a lot of anime cover it. and I've read up on a bit of the time period, which is kind of good. And the Japanese don't exactly favor the Westerners for this period. Um,
Yeah, because
so
our ships came over there in the 1850s and were like, yeah, you're going to open up trade with us or we're going to shell the shit out of you from our ships.
And that's not to say that the Japanese were necessarily good angelic people back then either. They were
Yeah.
quite they didn't want to open their borders because they were xenophobic as hell.
Well, and
So yeah.
watch Martin Scorsese's Silence for more info on that.
Yeah.
So with that being said, you know, I look at this and again, I still get a lot of notes of the typical white savior movie of that time. You know, white guy comes in, learns a lesson taught to him by a minority group that he invests himself in, Dancing with Wolves, Avatar,
There are those
etc.
who call this Dances with Samurai.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, uh, but I did find this interesting. I enjoyed uh, the effort that they made to trying to portray accuracy of the time,
Mm-hmm.
trying to create an interesting narrative.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, I look at this as a movie that I don't dislike, but I don't love. So I kind of like am like this is okay. This is an okay film. I
Yeah.
enjoyed it enough. Mhm.
And that's fair enough. Which one thing, because that's another criticism I've heard of the film is the white savior narrative tropes, and you could definitely make that argument. For me personally, I would say that on a perhaps a surface level, you could say that. I think for me personally, what I love so much about it is that. Well, okay, so just in objective fact, at that time,
Mhm.
America and most of the West, was more technologically advanced, but Japan also, took that and ran with it and was like, yeah, we want to learn from this. But also, I think it's less about a white person coming in and necessarily saving a group of people that are technologically inferior or whatever, as much as it is about. I mean, you can, yeah, it learns a lesson for sure from these people, but it's less about thinking that one can actually win as much as trying to find
Mhm.
a place of peace from a place of inner turmoil. So it's again a very internal struggle that is just externally represented.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
And just to give just to say this, and again, in the movie's credit, I'm not saying by any means that I hate the movie or disliked it. Um, but I wonder if I had seen this movie back when it first came out,
Mm-hmm.
would I have the same opinion as watching it for the very first time in 2020?
Good question. I mean
Yeah.
that is I'll be the first to admit. So well, I'll let David go, and then I'll tell you mine. But yeah, David, go ahead. Was this your first time?
No, it is not. I actually saw this back in the theater when it came out. I was in high school. I was just finishing up graduating, and I think I saw it with my mentor that I had mentioned before, that was placed to me by the state. And he would take me out to movies from time to time, and it would be it'd be like a good bonding moment or whatnot. And it kind of gave me my love of watching films in general, and I fell in love with this film. I fell in love with the performance that Tom Cruise enacted. I'm normally not an entire fan of Tom Cruise because I think that it was very cocky when he first came out.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Tom
And
Cruise cocky? No.
and
I think of that
What?
whole couch scene.
far
with
as-
Oprah.
as far as,
No, I grew up on Top Gun.
far
That was all.
as far as your opinion, Jake, of sticking out like a sore thumb in Interview with the Vampire, I agree. I don't think that was the role for him.
Mhm.
But that being said, I think this was his harshest role that he has ever played.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think this was his coming out from being typically cast as the white guy on campus.
Mhm.
I mean, he's got a gruff look to him. He definitely does not look like a pretty boy in here.
Uh-uh.
And I think this role was perfect for him. It's not that I hold him up on a pedestal or anything like that. I understand that the samurai stories were a hell of a lot more bloodier.
Mhm.
Just
Right.
like I'm sure some of the pirate stories that we hear were a hell of a lot more.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Talk about romanticism versus fact.
I mean, even Constantine, I think some of those in the Holy Roman Empire and the whole,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the church pretty much held a hefty hand in the whole slewing of their kind. So it was
Mhm.
Mhm.
to me. I think in order to show the humanity that the samurai can feel, this was the perfect movie.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
At least for the American audience. I mean, yes, it's kind of a drama, but you don't get the Titanic love scene in here. It's not dirty like they were trying to make it look like just a sleazy sex story. So
Yeah.
there's more respect that is learned as an actor
Oh,
because
yeah.
there is a moment where you see Tom Cruise's character walk straight into the home, and you can see that his footprints are in the thing, and then the next time he comes through, he's respectful and puts his boots outside the place.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Well, that's actually a good microcosmic representation of the movie as a whole. I think you've got some. If anything, that's just you look for in really good scripts. They'll often have those tiny moments in them that are emblematic of the overall theme of the film. And you're right. You have this person in Western dress, a warrior from the West, very accomplished, who goes into this place that's unfamiliar with his dirty shoes, but the next time takes them off, and then eventually is given a kimono, and learns enough Japanese to get by, and all that stuff.
And
Well, one
Brandon,
could say that about Dances with Wolves as well, because it hits that narrative. It hits those narrative beats quite well. Well, actually, well, I guess considering how well received it was, I
Right.
guess so. But again, that's one I'll have to watch again because, yeah, I watched that one back around the time it did come out. So, very different cultural feelings, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I have not watched Dances with Wolves in forever. I remembered liking it, but I did see Last Samurai first, and I'll admit that did kind of color my perceptions of things. One thing that go ahead.
This could almost be almost like a sequel to Dances with Wolves. I could see
Very a spiritual sequel for sure. Covers a lot of similar thematic territory. I would personally give. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it's a trilogy. You have Dances with Wolves, and then we go a little bit further to Last Samurai, and then we go far in the future to end it with Avatar.
Well, I think I would put Last Samurai as the best of the three, and then Dances with Wolves, and then Avatar and dead last. But I would say, so for me, I saw this film. I would love to have seen this in theaters, but I was only like 11 or 12 at the time. And
Mhm.
I saw it when it first came out on DVD. And, this was again at a time when I was neither child nor adult. It was, middle school age. That's always a weird in between time for you in terms of your maturity, in terms of your what you're allowed to see versus what you're not, and a lot of changes. And it didn't help that we had moved to a whole other part of the country, opposite coast, on top of all that. So that was a very turbulent time. And so then here comes this film that is not just a breathtaking epic film, not just an extremely well acted drama, not just really thrilling action scenes that are not necessarily battles in the classical military sense, not just all of that, but it's a film really about a person undergoing immense turbulence, a tortured conscience, someone that is a wandering soul, someone that wants nothing more than to succumb to emptiness and to hopelessness, um, who manages to find a place of inner peace beyond even finding a purpose. But even more than that, just finding a way of handling the otherwise kind of hopelessness of his existence, or perceived hopelessness. He
Yeah,
which
right
then,
off
well,
the bat. I mean, he is a haunted man. I
big
mean, he is deeply haunted by some acts of cruelty that he has seen in his army life. I mean, he remembers a whole slaughter of women and children
oh
that
yeah,
sees very vividly, at least in the very beginnings of this film, and seeing some of what he saw. I don't know any man, woman, or a child alive that if you saw that kind of a thing, depending on how close you got to these people, you can't just have no conscience about it.
See,
oh
that's
yeah,
the thing. Is some people do. Like his Colonel Bagley, I think it is, the Tony Goldwyn character, is the one that I think is the one that actually hired him for the role, if I'm remembering correctly.
Well, it
And
was Billy Connolly who
well,
comes to
Billy
get him, but
Connolly,
yeah, it was his immediate superior who hires him ultimately.
but they had served together under Custer. And
Yep.
one thing I forgot to mention in my initial thing, I mean, everyone knows what a big Naponophile I am, but there's also a big personal interest in the fact that when I was growing up, I was taught one version of American history. And it was, I think, in 11th grade that I had a teacher who, one, had an economics background, and two, he encouraged us in the form of assignments to step out and read stuff about American history that we would never have looked at before. And between those two things, seeing American history from an economic perspective and reading a book about the Native Americans and their wholesale slaughter that had a section on Custer, suffice it to say, I am no fan of Custer. I think he's one of the biggest douchebags in American history. And he also
was kind of a military fuck up too.
Oh yeah, I was going to say he was also an idiot. That so-called Custer's last stand wasn't some great military achievement. It was he screwed up and he paid for it. And that was basically, so the whole idea that these two served under Custer, that was kind of a nice little personal thing for me. But one of the things I loved is the part where Nathan Algren, Tom Cruise character, is talking to Bagley, and he's like, for $500, I'll kill anything you put in front of me. But don't ever forget this. I'd kill you for free.
That's
I
one of my
tried.
talk about favorite scenes. That's way up
Right.
there for me because I think that again Tom Cruise, like I absolutely love him as an actor.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons why is because more so like in his younger days, yeah, he could play the cocky whippersnapper, all that stuff, but like I think at his best
Mhm.
he's at his absolute best when he is delivering Clint Eastwood-esque stone cold penetrating dialogue like that. And I mentioned Clint Eastwood because honestly, especially now that he's getting older, I think Tom Cruise should start transitioning into roles that Clint Eastwood would have played. Like
Yeah.
those kinds of characters, like those are perfect
Mhm.
for him. And I know that like with like the Mummy, for example, like he wants to kind of do that 90s blockbuster thing again, but it's like
You
you're
just have
when
me
you
thinking about Gran Torino and like Tom Cruise would be that crotchety old dude. Kids, get off that.
well, I could see it, couldn't you? I mean, like I could see
You
Tom
know,
Cruise doing like an Unforgiven type movie,
and it's interesting that you picked this movie because the man who plays the Colonel Bagley or whatever his name is,
Mhm.
Tony Goldwyn. He started out in Friday the 13th, Part 7,
Oh
Oh,
wow.
really?
as Darren and Jason lives. So I think that it's kind of funny since we've started
Nice.
talking about the Friday the
Okay, great.
13th on Brandon's channel. We should begin
Oh,
Bringing it all back.
didn't
here.
you say part 6 was your favorite part?
Part 6, yeah, definitely.
Okay, good
Um,
deal.
I was gonna say it's all connected.
Yeah.
But I think so with Nathan Algren as a character, we've kind of let me finish my impressions. But I think what I love about it is again like the at when Nathan Algren is at his this is kind of impressions slash transitioning into Nathan Algren as character, but um in the early parts of the script again he has succumbed to drink to dull the pain of his tortured conscience for having witnessed and participated in genocide of numerous Native American peoples because he mentions Sioux, Cheyenne. He mentioned Billy Connolly says you should hear him blathering on in Blackfoot. Um,
Mhm.
so like he's been a part of many of these things, but you transition from his succumbing to nihilism or wanting um, to finding not just something larger to believe in, because it's really not even believing that he can realistically win this fight. It's more so about embracing something larger than himself, larger than any one specific person or group of people or even a period in history. It's about, well, a code, it's Bushido. It's about finding, well, like he said in the garden scene, life in every breath. And, you know,
Mhm.
and I think that's really what it's about. And so for me personally, I think this movie towers over a lot of similar films because it fits a lot of the white savior trope narratives structure, at least on its surface level, like the skeleton of it you can put in there, but it's really about going from a place of hopelessness to a place of peace and purpose. And also the Last Samurai as a title, this is another criticism that I can kind of debunk right now. um the Last Samurai, the word samurai is both a singular and a plural. So for
Mhm.
those that have said, oh, Tom Cruise has to be the big man, he has to be the last samurai, blah blah, blah. Well, it is a plural also, so it is also about the last samurai people as well, about this passing of a period in history of a way of life, a belief about how one conducts oneself in the world, that sort of thing. So again, I would kind of debunk that a little bit, but then transitioning into Nathan Algren as a character, I think that this is by far one of Tom Cruise's best performances. It's up there with his performance in Born on the 4th of July, which is one of his best by far. And particularly because he can play a character who is stone cold on the one hand and, unbelievably tortured on the other hand, but also someone that is able to show love and compassion, but in an equally restrained kind of Clint Eastwood-esque way. And so again, he shows that transition very nicely and very believably. He never goes too over the top. His choices feel very in character for who this person is. This is someone that, by all accounts, he's, you talk about, the end of an era and the passing of this warrior class and everything. Nathan Algren is an example of someone that would tragically become an underutilized or undervalued part of, certainly in the United States, but also I think the world over, the idea of the warrior scholar. So in other words, he's someone who's obviously very accomplished on the battlefield, but he also translates and knows a lot of different Native American languages and can speak them very well. And then in his journal, he is quite eloquent, very, very well written, thinks deeply about things, very introspective. And, that's something I think
and he
that
did have a published book as well. They mentioned that a few times.
that's right.
Yep.
So, I mean, I think that that's something else to throw in the mix is that nowadays we're used to war being such a, not only a mechanized thing, but also there's a lot more of a notable gap between, like because I think in centuries past, the idea was that in order to be a truly accomplished warrior, that one had to become as mentally formidable as physically formidable. As they said in Spartacus, a good body with a dull brain is as cheap as life itself, and
Or we
it's
could
true.
bring it back. We could bring it back to our recent discussion on Gunslinger Girl, where you have the one girl who reads and reads and reads because her mentor said that he had no interest in a soldier who wouldn't read.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you're starting to. I think everybody's starting to see a common theme in some of the stuff that really strikes a chord with me. It's learning and education and finding hope in the midst of the hopeless. And I'm noticing that myself. I'm like all of my top choices seem to fit that mold.
Speaking of bringing things back around, I do want to mention briefly, Dave. You alluded to this was like. Sort of almost a revelation for you for Tom Cruise as a more dramatic actor. This film actually did come out 4 years after his Oscar-nominated turn in Magnolia, which is a wonderful film. And that was one where he kind of went back and forth between the tortured soul and the cock of the walk, basically. He was like a self-help guru, if I remember. His dying father.
A pickup artist.
Yeah, his dying father was I would think that was the last cinematic role, I believe, for Jason Robards, who we recently saw much, much younger in Moe's pick, The Ballad of Cable Hogue. So it all ties together. Yeah.
Well, but it's a good point. I mean, because that does seem to be the two Tom Cruises that we generally get. The tortured soul or the cock of the walk, and as Magnolia proves, those two things do not necessarily have to be separate. In fact, it's kind of like the two Adam Sandlers. There's the like kind of the malcontent that's played up for comedy, and then underneath that is the loving but very, very kind of neurologically different person that tries to be good and normal, but doesn't fully know how to get there. So, I mean, that's what's kind of genius about well, both like I'm thinking Punch Drunk Love, Magnolia. Yeah, that's and both Paul Thomas Anderson movies.
Yeah.
You know, that's the genius of how you can tap into an actor's strengths and everything. But as far as Nathan Algren as a character, I think he's a very interesting character that I think actually is more interesting than he would necessarily appear at, at first glance. And part of that is not only Tom Cruise's performance, but part of it is also what we know about him from the writing. And again, that goes back to John Logan as a great writer. One of the scenes that I think is most indicative of his character, at least in the beginning, is the fact that he is very willing to die, but also willing to go to extreme measures to make his point, which is very well founded, but unfortunately it doesn't cut any ice. Case in point, Mr. Graham, tell this man to fire at me. Tell him if he does not fire at me, I will kill him. And you know that he's perfectly able to do that. You know, he doesn't want to, but he, like, in terms of ability, there's no doubt that he could. And but just the fact that he had the balls to do that, and it made his point very, very crystal clear. But unfortunately, because of his superior officer, who thinks that pure technological superiority with no adequate training, you know, he thinks that that will alone save them, you know, and because of his arrogance, of course, you know, it proves to be quite the ill-fated venture. But what did we all think of Nathan Algren as a character, for how well he's fleshed out as a protagonist and everything?
Well, I started to say it a little bit ago. I mean, we start off where he's working for the Winchesters as an advertising agent of sorts, because he is a war hero from the various battles that he's been in, and he's like on his last leg, you know, and. So we see him in a very destitute, a very drunken state, and you can see that he hasn't exactly quite escaped his horrors yet, especially in that very beginning scene, where we see him shoot into the audience, and there's just like enough of an edge that if you were standing in the audience, you could definitely feel, you know, the pain that he went through. And then he ultimately gets hired for let's see, he was getting paid what, $25 every week to
$25 a week, and then $400 a month, and he raises it to $5 plus more when they get the job done.
Yeah.
So he's quite at the negotiation process. Not to mention the fact that he was exceptionally accurate with that Winchester rifle while very clearly inebriated. So again, that doesn't impede his aim at all.
At this point in time, he's willing to be a gun for hire.
And I think there are many of us who know that individual who's much more dangerous drunk than they are sober. And I don't mean sloppy, dangerous drunk. I mean, as in a lot of their skills are refined because it becomes second nature instead of letting the mind get in the way. I mean, a lot of Vietnam vets have
drunken
that.
master with a gun.
Oh yeah, what's not favorite moment, but specifically one of my favorite lines of dialogue. Son, do you know what this could do to a man? This would blow a hole in your daddy 6 inches wide. Oh, that's right, Missy.
And then he starts firing, and the whole crowd is like, "What? What? This isn't supposed to be part of it."
There are good little moments of humor spread throughout, which again, that's good screenwriting. Like, it doesn't break the tone, but because it's very believable to what is happening, but it just kind of helps to flavor it a little bit more.
And part of that we'll talk about, I guess, Well, we could, I guess, unless I'll go ahead and give a couple thoughts on Nathan, and then we could use this to segue into a character who kind of is a comic relief. But we have, Billy Connolly. I was thinking more Timothy Spall, but both of them kind of fit that function a little bit. But Nathan is a very interesting character. I do think it is one of the more complex characters that Tom Cruise has done, and I think and that whole, you're right, the whole thing of like, it's more about the journey of trying to find peace, which, again, there's some themes there, tying back to Silence a little bit and some of the others.
Oh yeah.
You get a lot of that. And in a sense, that was a little bit of his character arc in Magnolia as well, because he was so estranged from his father and trying to find, if not peace, then at least a measure of understanding between them.
Yeah, closure.
Closure is a good way to put it. And in a sense, this is kind of like his closure with his old life. And I think he's a good character. I like it. Tom Cruise might not have been the very best person to essay that role perfectly, but he does a very good job with it, and it's pretty interesting. But yeah, I do want to say, like, since it's fresh on the mind, Billy Connolly has a sadly brief role in the film. It's not as long as I would like. And he's basically an old comrade in arms who is has sort of a what will be sort of outlook on life.
Yeah.
Gives him a little more of a. He reminded me a little more of kind of how the MASH unit faced the horrors of war. Not as flip as they are, but that's kind of his defense mechanism, and he is actually genuinely friendly with Nathan. Zebulon Gant is his guy, and then you got Timothy Spall plays a historian / translator / mostly translator. Simon Graham,
exceptionally British, I might like to add. Capital.
He is a fun and underrated actor. He's had some really good roles over the years, and this, I think, is probably one of the better. I think this one may have been. Wasn't this the same year that Prisoner of Azkaban came out?
No, that was 2004.
Year before. So this was probably my introduction, and then I saw Azkaban. I'm like, oh, I know that guy.
Oh yeah, well, he's an actor who he does tend to fit a lot of like either supporting roles or bit parts or whatever, but he does them exceptionally well, and he's very, very memorable. And that again, that's it's not the size of the part that counts; it's how memorable you are.
I take that back. He was in Vanilla Sky with Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
Well, and he also got nominated for an Oscar for Mr. Turner for Best Actor, if I recall.
He did, but Mr. Turner was boring as hell, like most Mike Leigh films are. But the one Mike Leigh film that's a major exception to that, he did also have a role in Topsy Turvy, and that was a fun movie. I enjoyed that one. So that's
well, it isn't. So okay, so you got Mr. Graham was, I remember that. So Mr. Graham was very like upper crust British, and then Billy Connolly, I think in real life, isn't he Scottish in real life? But he was playing an Irishman. Oh, he's Irish. Okay.
No, I know. I take that back. I am so sorry. I take that back. He is Scottish.
Yeah,
he does play a lot of Irishmen.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that his particular accent is close enough that you could buy it. I mean, it's because like he was saying boyo, which is a Irish word, it's Gaelic phrase, But I was like, yeah, I know of him as being like a really Scottish actor and comedian and everything, but
Yeah.
I mean, I think that he does his own thing exceptionally well, and I agree. Like, it's too bad that we don't see more of him, but at the same time, that which we do see of him makes us really like him to where when we do tragically lose him too early, we miss him, and so that would be better than not
Right.
caring about him at all. Well, especially because he's like screaming at the poor ragtag Japanese army, and they don't know what he's saying, but they can hear the tone in his voice, and they snap to attention. He's like, "What? What?" And it's not in English, not in Japanese, but he's like, "Once you learn the language, it all falls into place."
I think that the idea is that he doesn't need to necessarily pass with the Irish audience. He just needs to pass for everybody else.
Yeah,
Right.
which is, fair enough, I suppose. But point being, I liked what he did. Damn it. And so then we need to touch on Katsumoto, of course, because he's like, in many ways, I think he's kind of the heart and soul of the movie, at least as far as the, Japanese in the film are concerned.
Correct.
And man, does he do a good job. I mean, this was, as far as an introduction to Western audiences, this was a damn good one.
Mhm.
I agree. I mean, as far as anything, the first thing that we get of Katsumoto is the dream that he has of this white tiger, and
Mhm.
he is also a haunted man, but I guess he's somewhat found peace in his life, regardless. But he is a fierce warrior as well, as
Mhm.
as he later when Nathan goes up against him and knows that his doom is coming. But I like the fact that the actual battle and attack. He is a resilient man who, even though he is struck down, he keeps getting back up,
Mhm.
and
Hmm.
he is resilient in being that kind of a person later on as well. Um,
Mhm.
that same resilience is shown when he takes a stick from a child and begins to fight with the child, and then he goes up against Katsumoto's number one man, and he keeps knocking him down, and he just keeps getting right back the fuck up.
Oh, I know. Well, and that again. That's very indicative of character, and it's
Mhm.
well, obviously we all know that the Jedi were derived from the samurai originally in their conception, but the idea that connects them particularly is the idea of that you can be a more formidable warrior when you are fighting from a place of peace and focus and tranquility and everything like that than you can if you're fighting from anger, from a place of rage and
Mhm.
survival and reactionary and all that. Because Nathan Algren's a very, very formidable warrior even when he is fighting from a place of anger and survival, because he fights off manages to hold his own against a circling group of samurai with just a flag, not even really like a sharp weapon, but
Mhm.
holds out for much longer than he should have. And that's just fighting from a place of anger, let alone being able to really put, because like one of my favorite monologues, or voiceovers from his journal, which again, he's a very good writer, very introspective, and Tom Cruise also delivers those voiceover bits really, really well. But one of my favorites was where he was talking about how there is, a piece about this place, and that the people, as soon as they get up, that they devote themselves to the excellence of everything they pursue, and that's something that is indicative of you come at whatever it is that you're doing, whether it is war, whether it's cooking, whether it's playing ball, with the kids or whatever. It's just fully devoting oneself to that endeavor. I think that's what he ultimately learns, and what Katsumoto is able to impart. That unfortunately, again, in our very mechanized age, we don't really think about as much.
Another reason why this film imbues me to it is the fact that the place that Katsumoto takes Nathan to is up in the mountains. Now, if you'll remember another Japanese movie that has something to do with a mountain, that is Kashimuga. And for some reason, I like the fact that their armies were up in the mountains. Now, their battle strategies were a little different because they had more banners and more different colors for their different armies. But here we have a similar samurai army that lives in the mountains. So to me, I love that movie, Kagemusha.
Well, and also being up in the mountains, as they mentioned, it is a very good strategic move because of the winter and everything, and just it's hard to traverse the mountains on foot or on horseback. One actor that I think is the most underrated actor in the whole piece is Kyoki Kato, who played Taka, the wife of the samurai in red that Nathan kills on the battlefield. I think her performance is criminally underrated, and I don't know of anything else that I would have seen her in, but she talk about being able to say talk about being able to say a lot without saying very much at all. Like, she's carrying an unbelievable burden of having to house the man who killed her husband, and also having to not allow herself to succumb to blind hatred, but instead approach it from a place of serenity and acceptance for the fact that both of them did what they did and coming from a place of duty and what they felt like they had to do. So it wasn't personal in any kind of way. But still, I mean, I can't even imagine how much of a burden that would be, and how tempting it would be to just blindly hate someone like that.
She was in a movie that I believe was nominated for our choices for this month. She played a significant role in Blood the Last Vampire. The live action attempt at it.
Well, that one wasn't put up, but yeah.
Okay.
It was the animated one, but yes.
A lot of these characters, they intentionally stocked the cast with pretty well-known Japanese actors. A lot of these people have shown up in Western films since then. Watanabe, of course, we recently saw in the Godzilla films. But Togo Igawa, who had a very short role as General Hasegawa, has a role in the Guy Ritchie film The Gentleman, and he's been in some other stuff as well. Hiroyuki Sanada, who played Ujio, who I think is the one, I want to say Ujio is the one that Cruz's character keeps having troubles with. Like, they're the ones that are kind of pitted against each other a little bit. But Hiroyuki Sanada has been in quite a lot of cool stuff over the years, and I'm trying to remember. He's in Ringu and Ringu Ni, Onmyoji. The White Countess was one I did see. He was in Speed Racer. I haven't seen that yet. Several appearances in Lost, The Wolverine. So he's had a few. And Avengers Endgame. He's had a few. But do we have any particular one? Well, I will admit Taka is a fun character. I mean, maybe fun's not the right word, but She did do a good job.
I didn't even know that they were redoing Mortal Kombat.
Yeah, I didn't know that either till just now. Sonata is apparently playing Scorpion in the.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, could be. Could be. Who's involved with this? The Russo? Really? Greg Russo.
The just as far as supporting characters before we get to other things, I have to also give a special shout out to Taka's children because I feel like I have to say that the types of characters and also just the casting, the way that they play them, they're very similar character types that I've seen in like anime and things like that, as far as like, the precocious kids but the ones who aren't too over the top, and like the, wiser older person, the loyal second in command who doesn't trust the interloper. And those are types that have existed in Western fiction too. But I'm just thinking of, I've seen that in anime plenty of times, but I have to give a special shout out to the kids in there because the children of the village, I think they don't really get thought of or talked about much, but I think that because see, these are children who are raised in a world where fighting is the norm, but again, it's fighting from a place of peace and control and serenity instead of.
Higan was the older child, right?
I can't remember the name, but
I believe he was. He is played by Sosuke Ikematsu, who was in Koriwa. Hirokazu Koreeda, his Oscar-nominated film *Shoplifters*, which was a great film. I love that. So yeah, that's kind of cool.
Well, but what I bring up the children specifically because they demonstrate how one can be raised in an environment where fighting is very normal, but it is coming from the right place. It's not like, say, in America where we have a culture that does thrive on violence from an early age, but it is coming from a very like aggressive place and a very kind of domination based place instead of coming from a place of discipline and control and everything. And yet, these kids are able to like play with each other and be happy and and like, make faces at the weird Western guy at the dinner table and, that kind of thing, which that's one of my favorite parts. And, it's just like, I think that, and again, these are children, so they don't have the world weariness of someone like Nathan Algren, but, it just shows that, that is possible, and it's something that I think, we can learn from, which there are a couple of little inaccuracies that I think are kind of unavoidable. One of which obviously was the fact that the samurai class was more corrupt than it's portrayed here. But again, we focus on one specific group. One thing that is rather glaringly inaccurate is the fact that so Katsumoto does not use firearms because he doesn't wish to degrade himself with modern technology. Guess what? In real life, the samurai class, they did stage a rebellion like they did here, but they did so with firearms and with modern technology. They were fighting largely because their rather privileged class really didn't have much of a place to. They didn't have much of a place in Meiji Japan. And it also, the emperor, was I believe he was very eager to modernize, but he also wasn't, as far as I know, wasn't like, as much of a pushover. Just a few little things, but it's mostly again, I think this is something that's more about the feeling of a particular time and place. I'm very impressed with the fact that for a non-Japanese film, I
Mhm.
think it's pretty damn respectful to the Japanese people, to their history, to the past, as well as the evolving, what was then,
Yeah.
obviously the present, the modernization, and that's kind of what they sum it up with, is that they can't forget, who they are or where they come from, which,
Mhm.
obviously that's very important for all of us. Um,
I
but
think
yeah, I'm
that's
just
one of
because
the
how it
yeah.
is in the West. We like to kind of talk down to or not fully understand other cultures, but I think for this kind of thing, they did a pretty damn good job.
I have
Mhm.
to agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the film definitely represents a change of times. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, out with the
Yeah.
old, in with the new. We have no room for those types of ideas. Let's crush those and those
Hmm.
rebellion, and so that we can enter into a new entrepreneurship with the U.S. of A.
Hmm.
With the
Or
railroad. All that
US and A, as for I would say.
jazz.
Uh,
I mean, as far
Brandon was trying to say
as
something. Go ahead.
I mean, one of the things you were talking about earlier about that cultural sensitivity, and the movie did a better job than I've seen with some
Hmm.
in this beat. Um, the a good example of a modern one that flubbed it really was the live action Mulan.
I did not
Well,
see
some
that,
people
but I
I
will.
haven't either.
I have not watched it as much yet, just because I'm not giving them my money. Uh, bec-
Mhm,
but that's more of a political statement than anything else. I'm going to keep that. I'm going to keep as far away from that as possible. But
mhm,
watching enough
Too
of
late.
analysis by Chinese audiences,
Yeah.
because the movie was crafted specifically. They changed around a lot of portions of history to make Mulan loyal to the emperor, to show loyalty to the head of the large government, to cater to
Hmm.
Chinese interests. They did a lot of things that they thought were right to get that approval. But when they did it at large, they had a lot of things that threw it off. Like they had mixtures of Japanese martial arts styles in it,
Hmm.
and things like and cultural issues there, which of course that was insulting to the
Mhm.
Chinese culture. They did a lot of stuff that was largely inaccurate to Chinese history, which also insulted the Chinese culture. And so I think that where this one was fairly decently received in Japan, because it was a lot more respectful.
Supposedly,
It,
it made almost as much in Japan, if not
yeah,
more, than it did here, and
Hmm.
and
they were quite fond of it.
I think a lot of it, and again, I don't really think the Japanese are an interesting sect of people. Like, I don't think they could give a flying anything about the white savior narrative,
No. Well,
because to them, a lot
in
of racial
Japan, when they
stereotype. Well,
in anime, whenever
yeah,
they have an American character, it's always like decked
yeah,
out in red, white, and blue, and it's like I love it.
Yeah,
It's great. I
yeah.
love it.
yeah.
So to me, it's I think that a lot of it was not just respecting it and showing some reality, but also giving it that polish to make it not quite fully accurate, but accurate in the way that it looks good and respectful at the same
Hmm.
time, which is
Yeah,
a good thing. It comes across much better than something like, say, Green Book today,
hmm. Which
which
I
is
still haven't seen.
which has a very similar narrative, but totally changed around a story of
Yeah.
a person. Well, that of a guy who basically is like, yeah, was thinking one way, had his mind changed as he went through the movie, but
Mhm.
yet is also historically inaccurate, because it turns out that the guy's mind actually in real life was not changed and he was still quite racist.
Mhm.
Um, but again, I think that that's two ways to look at it. I just thought it was an interesting thought when you're talking about
Well,
cultural respect.
you are right. Well, one major difference I would say is that well, China is in a weird place because they are more capitalistic and more, globalist than they've ever been, and yet they're still a communistic authoritarian regime with which we have to tiptoe very carefully if we want to get films seen there or made in any kind of collaboration or whatever. So it's kind of a weird situation, whereas Japan has vacillated. Japan's a little bit like Germany in the sense that they've vacillated very quickly, historically speaking, very quickly between they were isolationist and then they were imperialists and highly xenophobic, highly racist imperialists, because they thought they were the superior Asian race, and then they got obviously nuked, and then they built themselves back up into this technological powerhouse, but not really with militaristic goals again. And again, same with Germany, and they vacillated a lot more between the Holy Roman Empire, the Kaiser, the Nazis, the East and West Germany, and then finally modern Germany is like, holy crap, But point being that I think that you're coming at it from a different you're dealing with different people very literally, and from a different history, because it's, in other words, you're not having to kowtow to the demands of an authoritarian regime, that nonetheless is very more capitalistic than they would necessarily want to admit.
Now I will say that if this movie came across with a ton of cultural inaccuracies and in a kind of almost condescending way, only kowtowing to the government but not the people,
Mm-hmm.
I think it would have been received the same way.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't. It would not. I'll say this: it would not endure if that were the case, because the internet being what it is, we like to go back and poke holes in things that either are there or are just perceived to be there, and if in fact that were the case, if that were the case with this film, as it has been for so many other films. I mean, well, it was funny. I saw a news story the other day, Disney Plus adding a, cultural disclaimer for Peter Pan. And I'm like, you're just now figuring that out,
I saw something.
What makes men red?
Exactly. I'm like, holy shit, you're just now figuring that out. But
It's not just that one; it's other ones that they want to pigeonhole into to their own subscripture of we're ashamed of this. We're just not going to tell you.
That, or we're ashamed of this, and well, I mean, I'm glad that they're not going to do a full blown, Song of the South and just suppress it. But at the same time, it's more so the you're just now figuring that out kind of thing. But point being that yes, they could have fucked this movie up in so many ways that other Hollywood movies have done, including really great films about Western cultures. Like I'm thinking Braveheart, fantastic film, horrifically historically inaccurate in a lot of ways, and about white cultures, so it's like we can't even do it for our own ancestors, let alone for those of other countries.
Well, I mean, again, as a child of Virginia, I have always taken umbrage with Disney's rendition of history with Pocahontas.
Oh yeah,
that is it's not even
the fact that she was only 12 years old when she first met John Smith.
Well,
what do you mean? We passed that waterfall. She jumped down every day going to work.
Yeah, that's sort of the thing. It's like that's one of the reasons I love Terrence Malick's The New World, because I get to look at it. I'm like, I know this place. I watched the Disney one. I'm like, I ain't never seen that in Virginia.
Well, I mean, I grew up with Pocahontas and I loved it for what it was, but I'm not going to remotely. Well, I'm not going to remotely defend the accuracy whatsoever, because it ain't accurate for shit. But it's like I enjoyed it at the time, like as a film, but accuracy, absolutely fucking not.
No.
I'm not gonna sell my Blu-ray copy just in case Disney decides to pull a Song of the South on us, and magically not,
Oh, yeah.
have it out there anymore. But I did enjoy it as a movie. But yeah, I mean, accuracy-wise, absolutely not. But point being, with Last Samurai, that they could have fucked this over 6 ways to Sunday, and thankfully, at worst, you could say, okay, a little overly romanticized, but not even as egregiously as something like a good example again,
Arguably, not even as much as Braveheart. I mean,
Braveheart, or even like a masterpiece like Lawrence of Arabia, which to be fair, that's largely derived from T.E. Lawrence's own book, The Seven Pillars of Wisdom, and even he kind of overstated certain parts of his history, but point being that again, that one's rather romanticized, but again, masterpiece of a film. Which I would say this. I'd say that Last Samurai is less romanticized than that. But anyway, so I mean, I think we covered off quite a lot about this film. Did we have any favorites? Oh, actually, wait. One thing we do need to talk about. One of the things I love most about the film is Hans Zimmer's score, because this was right before Hans Zimmer did Batman Begins and began to do the same shit over and over again, like the kind of needlessly percussion heavy, needlessly brassy attempt at being epic kind of scores that he would do over and over again. This film, the score that he does here, it can be really big and action packed and epic when it wants to be, but just like the film itself, most of it is underscored with just really beautiful, tranquil, peaceful, gorgeous orchestrations that I think when it does need to be battle ready, then it is. But even then, there's an elegance to it and a beauty to how well the battle scenes are portrayed musically. So again, I think this, for me anyway, this was like his last truly great score, and it was very formative for me as far as film scores go, because it's one I go back and listen to all the time because it's so just tranquil, when it needs to be, which is through most of it. And I don't know, anybody have any comment on that?
That's a great score.
I thought the score was pretty awesome for the film, and it followed what it needed to be, and was great when it was great. So I think that's enough said. What were you going to say, Brandon?
I would say it's a fairly good score. I did enjoy it. I mean, one thing I did want to point out and about the plot, it's just the ending. And I mean, you had the ending that showed some sacrifice, and it's probably one of the things that has me most conflicted, because there's a part of me that really likes the ending, but there's also a part of me that looks at that as, does it have to be? I mean, I can understand Tom Cruise giving him the stuff there, but does it have to be Tom Cruise teaching the lesson to the Emperor at the end? There's something that just kind of sticks at me as this doesn't quite feel
Well,
right.
okay, so is he the one teaching the lesson, or is he just the messenger? Because all he really does is present his sword, and then the Emperor kind of gets the message just from that.
They see, but that's the debatable thing. One could look at it one way like that, but one could also look at it as him teaching the lesson.
Well, if he is, then it's definitely in a more tacit fashion than I've seen in other movies. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I do want to back up momentarily to your comment on the score. Again, I just see here that Hans Zimmer also did the score for Rango, and that was a good score too.
Mm-hmm.
I do
Forgot
want
about that.
I do want to say something about that ending because I feel it's not that I'm an entitled white person, but I feel like something should be said. I have nothing wrong with a white savior movie, uh, and I love you, Brandon. Don't get me wrong. I think it's because you live with some of the natives. So that being said, I do feel like your opinion is somewhat colored because you are a white man who has certain cultural experience where you know what I'm saying.
I would look at it as empathy myself as more of the issue. But that's the only thing I feel like is the issue when it comes to these is that there is a lack of empathy. The idea of why should we bother to care about this? But again, that's the thing. That's what makes these movies so interesting is
Well,
that I can look at it one way, you can look at it another way, and we can watch two different movies.
I get that.
One
The
could
only
look
thing
at
is, forget
one could even look at Birth of
don't
a Nation and say it is a perfect film about history.
just don't
Well,
just
sorry.
don't get empathy for the
well, it
history
is.
of the white man.
Well, it is. I mean, The Birth of a Nation is a movie that just objectively that everyone remotely interested in film needs to
Oh yeah.
see because of just how foundational it is.
The
But it
original.
doesn't mean that we have to. Yeah. Oh, it doesn't mean that we have to. Take its values as our own today, but we still
Yeah,
have to
that's the
pay we still have to pay tribute to what it did for the art of film as a whole. But I also think that it doesn't have to be an either or thing because it's one of those things where, especially when you're dealing with a period piece, it's like it's unavoidable that at that period in time that the United States, England, a lot of Western powers, technologically speaking, were more advanced than other parts of the world. That's just unavoidable. So
Mhm.
you will inevitably, whenever you're dealing with a period piece like that, the temptation to either fall into the outright traps of the white savior narrative or to at least skirt past some of the trodden ground of it. The temptation is there, or even just the you're just dealing with a period of history that this sort of thing happened in. That's just unavoidable. So it's a matter of how do you navigate that territory in a way that avoids as many of the pitfalls as possible. And all things considered, I think they did a pretty darn good job
yeah.
of it. Whether or
I
not
don't
it's
yeah.
well, whether or not it avoids as many of the pitfalls as is necessary for it to be an enjoyable film, that is ultimately up to interpretation. And I'm not, necessarily saying that the alternate perception is necessarily wrong, because I do think that one could easily read it that way. I think that even if one were to read it that way, I would say it's one of the lesser offenders of that particular mold if one were to read it that way. But that's not to say that interpretation is wrong.
No,
Oh yeah, and it's not to even say that it's a bad movie.
Uh-huh.
At any and I've not said at any point that I think that it's a bad film.
No, and I don't
Um,
think that you did either.
and uh, and so I just I like to point out that there is that viewpoint that can be there. Dave point out another viewpoint. It is as it is.
Mhm.
But to me, I
Exactly.
think that is the beauty of film. As I said before, it is an art piece. So two people can look at the Mona Lisa and say totally different things. They can say this is an amazing masterwork, of course, you have others like in one of the movies I was watching, I think Night of the Demons 3, where they're like, she's just a fat, ugly woman.
Well, and
So,
I mean
you
that
know,
also goes back even to the title that samurai is singular and it's plural, and you could read it either way or both ways at the same time. It's one of the central fallacies about a lot of art criticism, cultural criticism, whatever. People like to think that one thing must be correct all the time and the other viewpoint is not, or that there's a right answer or a wrong answer. Two entirely different things can exist at the same time, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's
Right or wrong.
hypocritical hypocritical, right or wrong, or that one contradicts the other or whatever. It's because guess what? That's life. Life is a series of totally opposite things occurring at the same time in the same situations. So but again, that's part of the complexity of talking about film in a frank way. Plus, I do think that this film in particular, very, very few. I'm trying to think. Like, there's the only person that you could kind of sort of consider to be somewhat demonized would be Mr. What's his face? The Japanese imperial Mr. Omura, the industrialist. Like,
Yeah.
he's the only
I
one I
love
can
his
think.
character.
I like him too, but like he's the only one I could realistically think of who, well, maybe him and Nathan Algren's superior officer. They're the only ones I can think of who are somewhat demonized, but even then, they have quite a lot of dimension and a lot of understandable motivation for why they pursue the courses of action that they pursue.
Yeah.
So even then, it's like they don't fall into the trap that even something as great as Braveheart fell into, where the English are pretty heavily demonized in that one.
Yeah.
Did we have any favorite scenes that we'd like to mention?
I didn't want to throw. I don't think I did anything on the ending either. I want to
Go
just
ahead.
mention. I liked that. I liked its openness. Like it was kind of open ended. It left you to you're pretty sure what's going on, but it's not like they don't slam you over the head with it. It's kind of just there to take what you will. And I think that's kind of a good way of going about it in this particular story. But as far as
insofar as like what became of Nathan Algren, like because they give
more or
you
less,
three, well, because they give you three possible situations where he died of his wounds, which quite frankly would in that time and place would be highly probable.
Yeah.
Two would be went back to his own country, which I think is probably the most improbable. Because what does he have to go back to, really?
Right.
And then the third one, of course, is kind of the hopeful ending of him having found a small measure of peace that few of us ever find. Which, for all we know, he could have done that and then died of his wounds, or maybe not so immediately, but
True.
maybe he had a shorter lifespan than he should have had. Maybe not that short, but shorter than most because of the wounds sustained. Which again, that would be very believable. But yeah, it doesn't. I do love that ending also because again, it fits the themes of the film very, very well. That one could reasonably hope because one could reasonably hope for a good outcome to come from someone like that, but also for a lot of people in history, if they weren't like the president or the emperor or the king or the whatever, they kind of just disappeared from the history books, if they were even mentioned at all. So I mean, even for someone as thorough as Mr. Graham documenting his story, it's like for a lot of people, it's like they never existed, and that's kind of a scary thought in and of itself. But
I guess that my favorite scene would probably be that ending because you have Nathan, who is a soldier who has been under under many different battles, and especially during the the war with the Indians. So he understood the savagery that the Indians could do to a white man. He empathized with their culture, and I think he is a man that stands alone throughout the whole film, because he also was able to have empathy for the way of the samurai. So he was not only just a man of the white culture, he was a man who understood the Indians, and he also understood the way of the samurai. So him coming to the emperor, he's a learned man of different cultures, now standing before this emperor who is considered a god, and he is presenting to him the sword of his mentor, who mentored him, and that is a high honor according to the samurai way. So to me, that is a perfect ending to the end of a culture and beginning of one.
Well, that, and also I think he's someone who he saw the savagery on the battlefield of warriors, and also the savagery of unjust, slaughter from a technologically superior force. And it's because there are two different things, and he even mentions these people had nothing to do with the raids, because it's not to say that a lot of American soldiers or whatever didn't get killed in raids and counterattacks and kind of guerrilla warfare and stuff, but I think it's also just showing that there is resilience and formidability on the battlefield, but also the depths to which a human can sink, mixed with being able to die for something larger than oneself. And that's part of what, like you said, the presenting of the sword, that's it's really key in one of his, I think it's his last spoken line of dialogue, which is, tell me how he died, I'll tell you how he lived, and it's like, that's really, that kind of brings it all into focus.
And it's also worth mentioning briefly in that scene that the gentleman with the extremely large mutton chops and mustache is Scott Wilson, is another fine character actor that we see every now and then. So that was kind of fun there. I've kind of mentioned a few of the good scenes as we've gone on, but one I think deserves a mention. I don't know if it's necessarily my favorite, but I just want to mention it because it always kind of stuck with me. And again, this is partly because of my bias against Custer, but there was the scene where Algren and Katsumoto are talking, and they're talking about Custer, and it's like Katsumoto seems to admire him as as a martyr or something along those lines. And Algren's like, no, man. Basically, like, no, he was just a fool, basically. And then he's trying really hard to convince Katsumoto of his viewpoint, and it's just making him more convinced of his own. And it's kind of an example, I guess, of what you could say of how sometimes things do get lost in translation, or sometimes something can have just a tiny different perspective and mean something completely different. And you can't really disagree with the way Katsumoto is understanding what he's being told, but it's not what he's being told.
Well, what do you focus on? What do you focus on about the same series of facts? Because that's absolutely the case. You can present the exact same scenario, like even if you have it on video evidence, you can show that to a whole room full of people, and you'll get 50 different perspectives on it. And so for him, he's latching on to what he gets out of it, which is someone that's having a very heroic last stand and having a dying for something. And then Nathan Algren sees someone that's a murderer, a Western expansionist, a genocidal idiot, who's not a good warrior at all, So, well, and even more than that, it's like it reinforces his own sense of nihilism, because he's seen not just the savagery of civilized man, but also the just incompetence, So it's like, in that kind of a world, it's like, well, what is there left to fight for? And so that's where that comes from. Brandon, favorite scene?
It's a toss up from the introduction of the character in the beginning with his whole interesting sales pitch for the Winchester rifle.
That's
And
probably favorites.
the other was the initial introduction to Japan in that period. I really did like just the general setting that they showed it off as, because you got to see the kind of transition between the modern and kind of the feudal era. And it is an interesting thing, because Japan really, really evolved quick.
Oh yeah.
When once the little disputes were put down, they became a technological powerhouse quicker than most cultures could have
Oh yeah.
adapted. So I gotta give it that. It's kind of a cool thing, and I don't know why, but whenever I see that, I'm reminded of Gintama, which is kind of funny, because they kind of mix that, except instead of the Europeans being the ones colonizing or trying to get in, it's aliens instead.
Which, and what's interesting is that when you compare the Japanese to the Chinese, the Chinese were some of the most technologically advanced people relative to their particular era. Like, I'm thinking of, wasn't it around like 900 AD when they got gunpowder, or maybe even earlier than that? But they were like the first people to get it, and they were, so they were way ahead of most other civilizations, and had a really wide reach with Genghis Khan and everything like that. And then the Japanese were largely deliberately isolationist, and were extremely good at what they were extremely good at, but they were not really out there trying to trade with other people and everything. They just got really good in their limited areas. But when they kind of had modernization thrust upon them, like you said, did they become masters of that. They made up for centuries of isolation in a shockingly short amount of time, which is, I think that says a lot. So we got favorites. Do we get everybody's favorite scene except for mine? I think we did.
I think so.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yep.
Man, I'm having such a hard time, because like a lot of my favorite moments are like specific lines of dialogue. Like I'm thinking of like I'd happily kill you for free. Like that always stuck with me, because it was so stone cold, and he delivers it so beautifully. I'm absolutely floored every time I see that. If I had, like, there's just a ton of like individual moments. It's so hard to sum it up into just one. If I had to, like, if you absolutely twisted my arm and made me pick one, I think it would be it's kind of one scene leading into another, but the one that I'm thinking of is it's kind of in the middle, and it's where Nathan Algren is learning Japanese ways, and he's learning, that from the minute that they get up, they devote themselves to excellence in everything that they pursue. And the line that always stuck out to me was, that I'm never been a church going man, but there is something spiritual about this place. And that really, it signals an awakening inside of him for that which is not religious in the Western sense, but is undeniably spiritual in the sense of finding that inner serenity and that hope and that meaning in the face of a world that seems so hopeless, and when that transitions into kind of the follow up of that train of thought, which is where he's talking to Katsumoto about Bushido and about they see the cherry blossoms and life in every breath and all that stuff, and it's like I think that really kind of sums it all up. I think because it's just it's so important because there are all kinds of reasons to despair about the way that the world is, and it's all about holding on to that which gives you meaning. Again, common theme in a lot of my favorite movies. Let's see, so we got favorite scenes. Any other final thoughts about this film?
Well, I think it is worth noting before we get away from it that the film, in addition to that, wonderfully is nice that they gave that Oscar nod to Ken Watanabe. It was nominated for the costume design and the art direction as well as sound mixing, but the production values were pretty incredible. And it's definitely the work on the period setting the tone in the period of the film. They did a really good job with that, and so I give them props for that. Definitely.
Oh yeah,
costume design as well.
Yeah,
costumes, the cinematography. Which I said this in the chat before we got on, but had this not come out in the same year as Return to the King, I think it hopefully would have gotten a little bit more notice. But again, Return of the King kind of bulldozed every other great film that came out that year, not surprisingly. Well, and the other thing that we haven't mentioned, well, in the climactic battle, gotta love this again. It's the kind of the themes of passage of time. You have the Gatling guns, which that's like was the first real what we would now call machine gun, as far as like just constant repeating rounds without having to reload in such a cumbersome way like they had to do like in the Civil War and everything. And that's just mowing down these samurai, and it takes them a while to actually load to get the thing going because they're so in awe of these people that they would have been the soldiers, they would have been of age to remember the idea of the samurai, but it's more so of like they see them well really as these larger than life figures, which by all accounts they were. And so after having mowed them down with this cold piece of machinery, they kneel in a it's partially it's respect for the ability of your enemy, but also it is ultimately that passage of the torch and of this end of an era. And it's just I think that's a very powerful moment. It could have played very poorly had the movie not done as much work as I think it did to not fall into a lot of the kind of patronizing Western traps that other movies have. But the fact that they did as much work as they did to do that sort of thing right, I think it plays very nicely. Any other final thoughts?
Actually, Dave, I had a question for you. When I saw that gun, I don't know whether I think you would be the only one that would get this fully. But whenever I see the Gatling gun like that, I'm always brought back to Outlaw Josie Wales because they utilize the Gatling gun so well in that.
And the Wild Bunch as well.
And even in like something like Django, the original Django, I mean that wasn't exactly a Gatling gun, maybe, but that was a probably distant relative of that gun for sure. I mean, the Gatling gun was a gun that shot like many different bullets all at once, and when it first came out, I imagine that weapon was a deadly threat to I mean, as you saw, it like pelleted like most of the samurai to the ground. I mean, in a matter of seconds, even though they were charging. So it was without a doubt they were not going to survive, and they knew it.
Well,
Mhm.
I mean, even that Winchester rifle, you know, that's how many rounds was that? 7 or 8 rounds without having to reload.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
even that was like a new thing at the time.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's really interesting stuff. Which actually, the Wild Bunch is also about the end of the oven era in the face of modernization, and
Mhm.
that's the Cowboys, of course, which is like the closest that the United States has had to knights or samurai in a mythical sense.
Yeah.
And
And
that
there's
also
no
has a Gatling gun. That one also is really, you know, violent and everything.
Mm.
Much more, I'd actually say much more violent than this because it's Sam Peckinpah.
Right. And
Yeah.
there's, of course, no accident that there's a lot of back and forth between the Western and samurai genres.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh
Oh
yeah.
yeah. Very much so.
So, do we want to save our full wrap ups for after we talk about Barton Fink?
Might as
I
well.
think so. Yeah.
Cool.
Sure.
Well, very good discussion, everyone.
Yep.
Everyone, stay tuned or tune in or whatever for Barton Fink.
Tune in, tune in, turn out, drop out, wherever it goes.
Different bat time, different bat channel.
That's right.